From CBC News, The World This Hour, I'm Pep Philpott. We begin this hour in Germany. At least 18,000 people are on the streets of Berlin today protesting against the country's coronavirus restrictions. The demonstration is going ahead after a regional court ruled against the government. It had banned mass protests after people at a recent rally failed to wear masks or keep their distance. More than 3,000 police have been deployed for today's protests after calls on social media urged activists from across Europe to arm themselves and gather in Berlin. Meanwhile, France's COVID-19 numbers are spiking again. The country has recorded its biggest daily rise in infections since March. Dominic Velitis has the latest.
France has seen a steady increase in the number of coronavirus cases over the last few days. On Friday alone, 7,379 new cases were reported. It's the largest daily spike since March 31st, the peak of the first wave. The country is now just a couple of hundred cases away from passing that grim milestone. That said, hospital admissions and daily deaths are relatively stable in France. That's because it's young people who are less vulnerable to the disease that are making up the majority of new infections. Yesterday, the French President Emmanuel Macron warned a second national lockdown could not be ruled out if infections spiraled out of control. The country is not alone. Over recent days, Spain, Germany and Hungary have also recorded their highest number of cases since the spring. Dominic Velitis, CBC News, Bristol.
Tributes are pouring in for actor Chadwick Boseman. He died yesterday after a battle with colon cancer, which he had not made public. Boseman is being remembered for both his art and advocacy. The star of Black Panther has also portrayed many prominent black figures, including Jackie Robinson, James Brown, and Thurgood Marshall. Boseman also pushed for better roles for black actors and audiences.
To be young, gifted, and black, we all know what it's like to be told that there is not a place for you to be featured, yet you are young, gifted, and black. We know what it's like to be told to say there's not a screen for you to be featured on, a stage for you to be featured on. We know what it's like to be the tail and not the head. We know what it's like to be beneath and not above.
Chadwick Boseman was just 43 years old. Swedish police say far-right activists have burned a copy of the Quran in a predominantly migrant neighborhood in the city of Malmö. The incident sparked riots and unrest after more than 300 people gathered to protest. Several police officers were slightly injured and more than a dozen people were detained. Later, 3 people were arrested on suspicion of inciting hatred against an ethnic group after kicking the Muslim holy book. And here at home, the Manitoba government says it has breached the privacy of more than 9,000 children with disabilities. The province says it unintentionally shared private information with dozens of departments and external agencies. Cameron McIntosh has more.
The Manitoba government is blaming human error as it asks nearly 100 departments and external agencies to delete an email it accidentally sent, which includes not only a spreadsheet containing health information of more than 9,000 disabled children, but also the password to access it. Information it says it intended to share solely with the provincial children's advocate. Anne Kavukian is a former privacy commissioner of Ontario and now privacy consultant. She calls this an unbelievable breach.
I'm not trying to suggest that these agencies are going to be ill-willed or whatever, but as you distribute personal information like this to organizations that aren't supposed to have it, invariably something happens.
While the information hit nearly 100 email inboxes, it's not clear if any of those emails were opened and the spreadsheet accessed. The Manitoba government says it's reaching out to all affected families. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And that's your World This Hour for CBC News. I'm Pep Philpott.
From CTV News at 6:42 a.m. today. Hello, I'm Andrea Bain from the CTV Newsroom in Toronto. Here are the top stories. Tributes are pouring in following news of the death of Chadwick Boseman. The star of Black Panther died Friday at the age of 43 after a 4-year battle with colon cancer. And thousands of people marched on Washington on Friday to mark the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic speech and to demand justice in the shooting of Jacob Blake. Blake was left paralyzed after he was shot by a white police officer last Sunday in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And U.S. President Donald Trump is heading to Louisiana and Texas to see the devastation from Hurricane Laura. The Category 4 storm killed at least 14 people and caused an estimated $16 billion in damage. And the NBA and NHL playoffs will resume today. Teams and players in both leagues have developed strategies to push for social change in the aftermath of the police shooting of Jacob Blake. For all the day's top stories and breaking news as it happens, tune to CTV News Channel or go online to ctvnews.ca. I'm Andrea Bain.
From CNBC Tech Check at 4 p.m. yesterday.
I'm Aditi Roy, and here's your CNBC Tech Check. TikTok's interim CEO saying there are, quote, synergies with possible buyer Walmart. In a CNBC interview, Vanessa Pappas explaining TikTok has been focusing on rolling out e-commerce features on the app. On Thursday, Walmart announced it was teaming up with Microsoft in a bid for the social media platform. TikTok is under pressure to sell to an American company before November 12th, when an executive order banning U.S. entities from transacting with the app goes into effect. And there are new details of Walmart's interest in TikTok. According to CNBC sources, Walmart was part of a consortium put together by SoftBank Chief Operating Officer Marcelo Claure, which also included Google parent company Alphabet. Walmart wanted to be the majority owner of TikTok, but the U.S. government demanded a technology company be the lead investor. TikTok is set to be deciding between the Microsoft-Walmart bid and a rival offer from Oracle. And finally, Airbnb's user base will fall 60% this year. That's according to new data from eMarketer. It will be the first time the company has experienced negative user growth. The report expects Airbnb users to nearly recover to pre-pandemic levels by next year. Last week, Airbnb filed its paper draft paperwork for an initial public offering with the SEC. That's all from the West Coast. See you back here on Monday.
From DW News Brief at 5 a.m. today.
This is DW News, and these are our top stories. Huge crowds gathered in Washington, D.C. to march in support of racial justice on Friday, the 57th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic I Have a Dream speech, given on the same spot. The rally comes days after the police shooting of Jacob Blake, an unarmed black man. The incident has reignited tensions over police violence against Americans of color. EU foreign ministers meeting in Berlin have agreed to impose sanctions on senior Belarusian officials accused of election fraud and cracking down on protesters. They also urged Russia not to intervene after Russian President Vladimir Putin promised military support for the country's leader, Alexander Lukashenko. A court in Berlin has overturned a ban on a demonstration against coronavirus restrictions planned for Saturday. It said the protests could go ahead if organizers adhered to strict conditions to stop the spread of the virus. Police are appealing the decision. A similar event earlier this month drew tens of thousands of people. This is DW News from Berlin. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DW News or visit our website, dw.com.
From Bloomberg First Word at 4:10 p.m. yesterday.
The House Foreign Affairs Committee is preparing to hold Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in contempt. Secretary Pompeo has repeatedly rejected the committee's subpoenas for records related to Ukraine. The House has asked for the same documents that the State Department has turned over for a Senate investigation into Democrat Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and his activities in Ukraine, but Secretary Pompeo has refused to provide them. Pompeo has said the House subpoenas are politically motivated, without merit, and unnecessary. President Trump heads to New Hampshire tonight, a day after accepting the Republican Party nomination for president. Mr. Trump narrowly lost New Hampshire to Hillary Clinton in 2016. He's trailing Joe Biden in opinion polls in New Hampshire and nationwide. The president plans to travel extensively in the coming months to boost momentum for his re-election. Peru now has the unwanted distinction of having the highest number of deaths in the world per capita from the coronavirus. Peru overtook Belgium to take the top spot today, according to the latest data compiled by Johns Hopkins University, the International Monetary Fund, and Bloomberg. According to a government study, a quarter of Lima's population may have been infected with COVID-19. German doctors treating Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny say he's still in a coma but is showing signs of improvement. Navalny, a fierce critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin, became ill on a flight back to Moscow from Siberia about a week ago. Doctors in Germany say tests show he was deliberately poisoned. Russia has denied any involvement. Several countries, including the United States, are demanding answers. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
All right, guys, let's listen to the podcast.
And for a while, it was a pretty booming industrial town, but now it's considered more of a Chicago suburb.
This is Gina Barton. She's been covering Kenosha for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
Around 5 o'clock on Sunday, the police got a call about a domestic incident in Kenosha, and they responded and they found some sort of disturbance that involved Jacob Blake and some women. It's not clear exactly what was happening. Some onlookers have told us that he was actually trying to break up a fight between the women. At some point, he became involved in a scuffle with the police officers who used a taser on him, we found out recently, and it was not effective. So then we've all seen this video of Jacob Blake standing up, walking kind of slowly around the front of his car and opening the door to get in. His 3 children were inside. He opens the car door with his back to the officers. One of them grabs him by the shirt and shoots him 7 times point blank in the back. He falls down onto the steering wheel and the horn starts blaring and people start screaming.
Wow! Why the fuck y'all just shoot him? Why the fuck y'all just shoot that man?
The police call for medical assistance, and Jacob Blake is airlifted by helicopter to the hospital, put into surgery. About 24 hours later, the news comes out that he has, in fact, survived and is expected to be paralyzed from the waist down. And within hours, mass gatherings of demonstrators and protesters are starting to take to the streets in Kenosha. By the time the sun goes down on Sunday, there are hundreds of people who have taken to the streets, and the unrest escalates to fires being set, windows being broken. An entire car lot was set on fire that first night. The protests continued on Monday night, and that's when things started getting worse in terms of property destruction after dark. There were several businesses that were burned in 2 different neighborhoods of Kenosha. The National Guard was called out. So that night there were 125 troops, and by Tuesday morning, our state officials had realized that that was not enough. So on Tuesday night, there were 250 National Guard troops, as well as a huge police and sheriff's department presence. And equally as many protesters, or maybe not quite as many, but the thing with the protesters was they weren't all in the same place. And I think that is when the situation became difficult to control. The line of officers marched into the park where the main protests had occurred. drove everyone out of the park relatively easily. But then once they had left the park, it seemed as if law enforcement didn't have a plan of where the people should go next. They kept ordering them to disperse, but then when people didn't, they kind of didn't know what to do. The other issue that we've had at these protests, not only this week, but all summer, is armed civilians, some of them officially calling themselves militias, some of them calling themselves other things, the Boogaloo Boys, the Kenosha Guard, have been coming in to the protests, they're saying, to help preserve order and protect businesses and protect people's safety. The Kenosha Guard, in fact, wanted to team up with the police and had asked the police and sheriff's department, hey, why don't you deputize us so we can help you? And the sheriff said his response to that was, oh, hell no. But in any case, the police were not arresting these men with guns on curfew violations. They weren't trying to clear them from the area. And in fact, a lot of people now have seen this video where sheriff's deputies from Kenosha were giving water to some of these armed militia members and in fact saying, we really appreciate your help. One of these armed citizens, who turned out to be a 17-year-old from Illinois named Kyle Rittenhouse, he shot a man in the head, and that man falls to the ground and dies. We're not exactly sure what prompted Kyle Rittenhouse to start shooting. What we know is that then Rittenhouse starts running. At some point, he trips, and he's on the ground, and two other people were trying to disarm him. He fired at both of those people, hitting one of them in the chest and abdomen area and killing him. And then the other man was shot in the arm.
Hey, he just shot them! Hey, dude right here just shot them! Dude right here just shot all of them down there!
At one point in this video, you can see him walking with his hands up, and the bystanders are trying to tell the cops, he just shot some people, that's him, he's the guy. And the police who are coming and the people in armored vehicles don't seem to hear, don't seem to realize, and then the shooter just walks away.
Someone injured straight ahead.
He ends up back home, and he's arrested the following day.
Authorities announced the arrest of 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse of Antioch, Illinois, in connection with the fatal shooting of two people, a 26-year-old from Silver Lake and a 36-year-old from Kenosha. A 26-year-old from West.
I think this is what a lot of people struggle with, right? It's that you watch a video of an unarmed Jacob Blake surrounded by his family members trying to get into his SUV where his kids are. He gets shot 7 times in the back. Then you watch this kid walking down the street with a semi-automatic rifle, everyone's screaming, pointing. He just shot people. He just killed 2 people, and he just walks by multiple armored police vehicles and cruisers and eventually goes home and goes to sleep.
The sheriff in Kenosha did address that very question yesterday. How did they just let this guy walk away? And I think there were 2 things at play here. One is when you have a lot of white men walking around with guns, people get used to seeing them and to thinking like, oh, that's just the militia guys, you know, which is kind of scary in itself. Kyle Rittenhouse is a young white man. Jacob Blake was a young black man. The other thing that the sheriff said about this incident is that it was, in fact, a very chaotic scene. And I believe him about that. It was crazy. People were screaming. Armored vehicles are really noisy. Police sirens, yelling. So it is possible that no one realized that Rittenhouse is the one everybody was pointing to. Maybe nobody could actually comprehend what they were trying to say, and it just sounded like panic screams to them.
how does this escalate after Kyle Rittenhouse kills 2 people on Tuesday night?
The shooting of Jacob Blake had received national and international attention on Monday. After the shootings on Tuesday night, this story became even bigger, and the spotlight was shining even brighter on Kenosha. The Federal Department of Justice announced that they were going to conduct a civil rights investigation into the shooting of Jacob Blake. The State Department of Justice started putting out information about the shooting itself, saying that he had a knife on the floorboard of his car. And then the Milwaukee Bucks, who were scheduled to play a playoff game, didn't come out of the locker room for several hours and instead made a statement saying, basketball is not important right now. We're not going to play. We need to urge our lawmakers to do something about this and to hold police accountable.
And we should note here that NBA players and coaches have been talking about this all week, right? LeBron James, Doc Rivers.
Just watching the Republican convention, and they're spewing this fear, right? Like, all you hear is Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones that we're denied to live in certain communities. We've been hung. We've been shot. And all you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back.
That snowballed into the NBA postponing all of their games on Wednesday. WNBA did the same thing.
Right. Some baseball games, some soccer games. I think hockey had like a moment of silence.
On Wednesday night, during his speech, Vice President Mike Pence addressed it briefly, saying,
"Too many heroes have died defending our freedom to see Americans strike each other down. We will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American of every race and creed and color."
There are definitely some people in Kenosha who were hearing Mike Pence's message about preserving law and order. One of those people was Kyle Rittenhouse, who we've seen photos from him that were published by BuzzFeed of him in the front row at a Trump rally. But the timing was poor, considering that one of those people who claimed to be out there promoting law and order killed 2 people.
More with Gina in a minute. Support for the show today comes from Sunbasket, because we could all use a basket of sun in our lives right now, or more specifically, a basket of healthy, delicious food. That's what Sunbasket is offering you right now. They've got tasty, easy to prepare recipes that'll go with that food and make you feel good about what you're eating. Every box of food you'll get from Sunbasket comes packed with organic produce sourced from small farms and fresh.
Explain. When you move across the internet, you leave digital. Get your data back. It's privacy, security.
Wisconsin for the first time because LeBron James is talking about it, because Mike Pence is talking about it, because of what happened to Jacob Blake and what Kyle Rittenhouse did. What do people need to know about Kenosha to really understand what happened there this week?
I think people should know that Kenosha has a long history of problems between the police and the citizens. But unlike Milwaukee, Baltimore, Minneapolis, some of the other big cities where these sorts of shootings have happened, I don't think race is necessarily the only factor at play in Kenosha. In Milwaukee, for example, white people tend to have a pretty good relationship with the police, and black people don't. In Kenosha, no one has a good relationship with the police. In Wisconsin, we were the first state to pass a law that required outside investigation of police shootings. So the agency where the officer is employed can't do the investigation of a fatal police shooting. And that happened because in 2004, the Kenosha police shot a young man named Michael Bell point blank in the head. Michael Bell was white.
Back then, police departments could investigate their own officer-involved shootings.
That Kenosha Police Department over there investigated themselves, and in 2 days, the co-workers of the men that killed my son found that the shooting was justified.
That's not enough time to do an investigation at all. And of the 5 shootings that we are aware of since that time, 3 were white, 1 was black, and the other we don't know. Those are fatal shootings. And another incident that escalated the focus on police brutality here in Wisconsin was in 2016 when the Milwaukee police shot and killed a man named Seville Smith.
Seville Smith was shot and killed by an officer following what police say was a traffic stop and a foot chase.
And at that point, we had a lot of violent demonstrations and civil unrest in Milwaukee, with buildings being burned and bricks being thrown, confrontations between police and members of the public.
So there haven't been effective reforms of this police department since the early 2000s?
As far as I can tell, there have not been effective reforms at the Kenosha Police Department.
How did they handle Jacob Blake's shooting?
To their credit, they called in the Wisconsin Department of Justice to do the investigation immediately. So I see that as an improvement. They're trying to be more transparent. They're saying, we're going to hand this off to somebody with more expertise than us in investigating these kinds of officer-involved shootings. So I do think that that was a positive thing. The issue that continues to present itself, though, is I think all of these protests have shown that citizens want transparency, right? They want to know what's happening. And if bystanders had not recorded video, we might never know what happened to Jacob Blake. People might believe the police version of events or not believe it, but have no credibility to back up the disbelief. Finally, 3 days after Jacob Blake was shot, the Wisconsin Department of Justice released the name of the officer involved and confirmed that Jacob Blake had been tased before he was shot and that there was a knife on the floorboard of his car.
Does all the extra attention on Kenosha right now, does the fact that, multiple sports leagues are postponing games and athletes are making statements, does that greater scrutiny mean Kenosha, Wisconsin might take reform a little more seriously?
I have hope that this shooting and everything that's happened since could possibly bring about some substantive changes in Kenosha and in the state of Wisconsin. One issue that we've had here, as in many other places, is the partisan divide. So for a long time, we had Republicans in charge of both chambers of the legislature and in the governor's mansion. And they were not necessarily inclined to institute a lot of police reforms. Now, we have a Democratic governor, and we have a group of Republican legislators who are also seeing that change is necessary. So on Wednesday, a set of bills to reform policing and police accountability was unveiled here in Wisconsin. We'll see how far it gets.
unlike so many of these cases that we're used to seeing, including George Floyd, including Breonna Taylor, including Ahmaud Arbery, Jacob Blake might actually be around to advocate for himself and for change.
Jacob Blake is expected to survive, and his family has already come out with some really strong statements about how unhappy he would be with all the violence that's occurring. And his mother made some really strong statements the other day about how if people will just focus on each other's humanity, things will change.
We are the United States. Have we been united? Do you understand what's going to happen when we fall? Because a house that is against each other cannot stand.
Gina Barton is an investigative reporter covering criminal justice at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. She hosts a podcast too. It's called Unsolved. I'm Sean Rameswaram. This is Today Explained.
Hi, my name is Martha. I'm a producer at Vox, and I recently got my first ever pair of Allbirds. They're Tree Dashers, the world's first performance running shoe made from premium natural materials. I don't know about y'all, but going for runs and walks has been the key to keeping myself afloat these days. So I was really excited when I took my Allbirds out for a spin, and they...
Of last week. No Bruce Springsteen, some Leonard Cohen, mostly patriotic scoring that sounded like it was lifted from Saving Private Ryan. It wasn't Zoom or video conference heavy. Instead, there were lots of people getting together in person. But beyond the different sound or look, this convention at times felt like it was set on a different planet. There were lies so blatant you had to laugh.
And his deep understanding of our system of government and the strength of American values is the man we can trust to preserve and even improve our way of life.
Comparison so audacious you had to howl.
Here at Abraham Lincoln's boyhood home, a young man would grow up to become the first Republican president of the United States. And today, another Republican president is fighting to preserve that same noble legacy of freedom.
And it felt like every fourth human in existence was a Trump. Like, there were so many Trumps on stage, you could take one home with you as a party favor. There was Tiffany, Eric, Donald Jr., Melania, Ivanka, Ronaldo, Kareem, Luciana. And Thursday night, they were all on stage on the South Lawn of the White House. A fair share of this convention was filmed at 1600 Pennsylvania, which hasn't been done in modern history and is very much illegal. But we'll get to all of that soon enough with Ella Nilsson, who is once again watching it for Vox. Ella, where do we begin? Like, last week you predicted this could be a bit of a mess. Did it live up to your expectations?
Not entirely. I mean, I had heard from some sources that logistically there were still a lot of things kind of falling into place at the last minute. A lot of the speaking got moved to Washington, D.C. at the last minute rather than Charlotte, North Carolina, where some of the kind of business of the convention happened. But as far as Republicans being on message and a cohesive message coming out of the RNC, they definitely pulled that off.
Right. And it felt like last week we got, Obama saying, this is a strange convention because these are strange times. This isn't normal because life isn't normal right now. But the Republican message seemed to be like, life is kind of normal right now, and they kind of had a more normal convention. There was less of an ambition to make a sort of Zoom-heavy thing, and because of that, there were actually, fewer production snags. It kind of went a little smoother, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of the traditional, speaker coming on after speaker. A few people zoomed in, but for the most part, people kind of streamed in and out of the Andrew Mellon auditorium, the this beautiful kind of concert hall in Washington, D.C. There were a lot of American flags. And then for the grand finale, Ivanka Trump and President Donald Trump spoke from the White House lawn, and there was a huge finale of fireworks spelling out Trump 2020 over the Washington Monument.
Right. I could hear it from my spot in D.C. It was like midnight. I felt bad for all the parents with small children.
And everybody who has dogs.
Oh, right, the dogs. Yeah, how could I forget? And speaking of things that upset the dogs, there was a very loud speech on night one from Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend that may have caused some canine conniptions.
Yeah. Yes. So night one featured, a lot of speakers, including Kimberly Guilfoyle with a very loud speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, leaders and fighters for freedom and liberty and the American dream, the best is yet to come.
I think people were comparing that speech to Dwight Schrute's speech from The Office.
Salesmen of northeastern Pennsylvania, I ask you, once more rise and be worthy of this historical hour.
They want to steal your liberty, your freedom. They want to control what you see and think and believe so that they can control how you live.
The emphasis there was the economy has been good under President Trump. There wasn't really much mention of coronavirus, but the big theme over and over again that started out on Monday night and really continued throughout the rest of the 4 nights was that President Trump is going to bring back law and order to a lawless nation.
It felt like night one was sort of the pilot for the rest of the RNC, and it really got underway on night two when the president sort of settled into a series of TV stunts.
Yeah, I mean, the other big theme out of this convention was the White House was being used again and again, essentially as a political prop. So night two, Trump did 2 things that generated a lot of headlines that weren't necessarily positive. One, he did a presidential pardoning ceremony at the White House.
So now I'd like to invite John's wife, Jamie, to join us as I grant John, I'm not sure you know this, a full pardon.
And the second thing that he did was a naturalization ceremony.
You followed the rules, you obeyed the laws, you learned your history, embraced our values, and proved yourselves to be men and women of the highest integrity.
So one of the things that we learned after was that one of the participants of the naturalization ceremony, didn't even know that it was being televised and broadcast for the purposes of the RNC. So, I mean, there was literally, people who were participating, who were becoming citizens, were essentially used as political props without their knowledge or consent.
And as I watched that, I wondered, has this ever happened before on live TV?
Yeah, this is an unprecedented thing, the use of the White House. And it's worth noting, the thing that we're talking about being violated here is the Hatch Act, which basically prohibits federal employees from engaging in overtly political activities like a party convention. So the issue here isn't so much that, Trump is doing it himself because the president sort of has immunity from this stuff. But, I mean, there were members of his administration, a member of the Department of Homeland Security who was participating in this naturalization ceremony, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who gave a speech from Jerusalem later.
The issue here being that we, the taxpayers, pay for these employees to do work, and instead they're doing work to get someone elected. It's a very overtly political work that they were engaging in this week.
Right. This is literally the Republican Party's convention happening in a space that technically is supposed to be for all of the people, whether you're a Democrat, Independent, or a Republican.
As the week went on, it became very clear that they were trying to court women voters by bringing out every woman Donald Trump had ever been nice to portray him as some kind of arch-feminist.
Yeah, grab him by the pussy. Donald Trump is a pussy hat wearing feminist.
And they sort of did the same thing with black voters, right? In between segments where Donald Trump would call COVID the China virus, they brought out a few black women and a lot of black men, many of whom seem to be former athletes, to say Donald Trump is not racist.
Yeah, I mean, this was, I think, one of the big points of the convention that kind of illustrates the Trump campaign's larger strategy in 2020. Last night we heard from a speaker who works in the White House as one of the president's, deputy assistants.
Every issue important to black communities has been a priority for him. Prison reform, rebuilding broken families, bringing jobs back to America. Jobs in Cleveland, jobs in Detroit, jobs in Milwaukee.
The larger picture here is that Black Americans typically vote Democratic. The vast majority of them vote Democratic. That's a pretty overt campaign strategy to sort of chip away at Biden's margins with black voters.
Okay, let's talk heavy hitters here. Night 3, Mike Pence. Night 4, Donald Trump. Pence's speech was pretty forgettable, save that killer last line.
And with President Donald Trump in the White House for 4 more years, and with God's help, we will make America great again. Again.
Yeah, I mean, nothing says you've made America great like needing to do it again.
And then the main event, President Trump, Thursday night, he opened this thing with lies.
Now, if you want to really drive him crazy, you say 12 more years.
12 more years.
Because we caught them doing some really bad things in 2016. Let's see what happens. We caught him doing.
His closing speech was very long. How many lies do you think he snuck into that?
I don't know. How many lies did CNN's Daniel Dale catch? Was it double digits? I'm guessing double digits.
Trump said Joe Biden is, quote, talking about taking down the border wall, the Veterans' Choice Law. Barack Obama signed that into law in 2014. Trump signed it in the American community than any president since Abraham Lincoln. That is ludicrous. Trump denounced so-called cancel culture as like an insidious left-wing thing. He, Donald J. Trump, has tried to get dozens of people and entities canceled, fired, boycotted, including literally last week, Goodyear.
What Trump was trying to do over and over again and really trying to hit home last night was like the economy was so great under him until coronavirus happened.
We passed record-setting tax and regulation cuts at a rate nobody had ever seen before. Within 3 short years, we built the strongest economy in the history of the world.
And without taking much of the responsibility for making coronavirus better, because we have essentially seen the federal government largely abdicate its responsibility in this front.
Or owning up to the fact that, like, the United States did the worst job in the world of handling this virus.
Right. I mean, we are not in any ways out of the woods on coronavirus, but the RNC made it seem like we washed our hands of that. That's done. We defeated it. It's all good. We're about to get our economy back on track. So it was very much like we were living in the future, essentially.
And unlike Joe Biden, who didn't mention Donald Trump by name once in his speech last week, Donald Trump found, dozens upon dozens of opportunities to talk directly about Joe Biden in his feature film-length speech last night.
Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, 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 Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Biden, Joe 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 Biden, Jo
It's interesting to me. I mean, a few months ago, I would have put money down on, the fact that the vast majority of any Trump speech at the RNC would have been about, like, Hunter Biden and Burisma and Ukraine. And that, like, barely came up. And instead, it was...
The radical left will defund police departments all across America. They will pass federal legislation to reduce law enforcement nationwide. They will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America.
And you call 911 and there's no operator there to pick up the phone because Joe Biden has defunded the police.
And we should let people know that Joe Biden does not want to defund the police.
Yes, Joe Biden does not want to defund the police. That is absolutely not part of his, platform or what he wants to do.
But that didn't stop, speaker after speaker after speaker at the RNC from telling you that he does.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a definite strategy here. I mean, Donald Trump and his campaign team know that the election is going to largely be decided in America's suburbs. These are suburbs, that president after president for years has tried to appeal to. And I think that Trump is sort of going for kind of the whitewash version of the suburbs, the white soccer mom who is afraid of, violence in her community, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's worth noting that the suburbs are a much more diverse place than that. But it is definitely, swing voters and independent voters are going to be the ones that decide the 2020 election. We saw them swing hard for Democrats in 2018. Trump is terrified that they're going to do the same thing in 2020 with Biden at the top of the ticket. And so even though, Biden is a moderate politician who actually over the course of his Senate career oversaw a fairly draconian crime bill, they are going to paint him as, the head of the new socialist regime that is going to defund the police and make your family less safe and take away all of your freedoms as an American. That's the message.
Well, Ella, it's been an experience.
It has. We just have to do debates now.
Can't wait. We'll talk soon then.
Okay. Bye, Sean.
I said it once, I said it 1,000 times. Support for the show today comes from the Michelle Obama podcast, which is now on Spotify. The series will bring you, listener, inside the former First Lady's most candid and personal conversations to show you what's possible when you allow yourself to be a little vulnerable, gosh darn it, to open up and to focus on what matters most. Michelle Obama herself says her hope is that this series can be a place to explore meaningful topics together and sort through so many of the questions we're all trying to answer.
God, that was painful. I'm so sorry, guys. We did it. We listened to the news, an episode and a half of Today Explained, and we did our yoga, all while high. All we need now is an affirmation. To look up the weather to see if it's going to rain, to decide whether or not I'm going to give my plants some compost water or not, to look up the weather to see if it's going to rain, to see if I should give my plants compost water. Noodle, don't noodle. You're too worried about what once was and not what will be. However, there's a saying, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, but today's a gift. Guys, that's why they call it the present. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Wish I could just automatically